Okay. Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Rohit Bhargava and I am part of the startup team at AWS, where our mission is to help grow the quantity and quality of startups and founders coming out of Australia and New Zealand. We're extremely excited to have teamed up with the Innovation Bay team to deliver this as a weekly content series that will run every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. We know that running startups is extremely stressful at the best of times, let alone when a global pandemic shuts down the economy. So we're delighted to have Rachael Neumann interviewing Dr. Toby Ford for our second installment in this series to discuss developing frameworks for resilience and performance enhancement for founders. If you aren't already familiar with Innovation Bay, it is the longest running community group for tech startups and investors in Australia. Their mission is to support founders on their journey from idea to IPO and beyond. They run events and programs across the country and now online, all focused on helping a community of over 5,000 founders, people working in startups, investors, and others to learn, connect, and grow. If you're not already a member, sign up at innovationbay.com. Before I hand over the mic to Rachael to kick things off, I wanted to let you know how the session will run. We will start with around 35 to 40 minutes of Rachael interviewing Dr. Toby before we jump into questions from you. Please submit any questions you have into the Q&A tab, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. I'll jump in at the end to facilitate this part of the session. We also have the chat function running so you can engage with others in attendance. Please be considerate of others whenever speaking through these channels. With that out of the way, I'll hand over the mic to Rachael to kick things off.
Thanks so much, Rohit. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachael Neumann from Amazon Web Services team. Welcome to our webinar series where we dive deep with our startup leaders to hear how they're navigating through these unprecedented times. For those of you who joined us in previous weeks, we've had insightful conversations with experienced founders like Adair Schiffman and Patrick Llewellyn, who have helped to shine a light on how they have and are managing through these turbulent times. We've decided to shift gears a bit this week and invite Dr. Toby Ford to join us in a conversation around founder mental health and resilience, which are always important, but really ever critical in these times. Dr. Toby is the CEO and founder of Ford Health, and he's been working for some time internally with the Amazon team, providing insights on how we can better cope with the events surrounding COVID-19, specifically on the subjects of resilience and performance enhancement. As a founder of a startup himself, now 20 years ago, the journey out from those early fragile beginnings onto the playing field of a growing business in this disrupted COVID-19 environment, it means that he can relate to the startup community that Amazon is partnering with. His mix of medical and business experiences supporting businesses of many sizes have been further added by him being part of the UQ Business School startup, which 6 years ago ventured into forming the Institute of Business Owners and Entrepreneurs that's now a standalone entity. He's currently forming a new startup, which is a philanthropic project on rural health improvement. Now, the reason we decided to tackle these issues today is that the statistics are quite sobering. In a University of California, San Francisco study just a few years back, they found that 49% of founders had self-reported mental health conditions, 30% had experienced depression, and that's roughly twice as high as the general population. So we know as a community, we need to keep shining the brightest light on these issues and ensure that we are tackling the stigma and supporting one another. And now it's ever more important. So Dr. Toby, thank you so much for joining us. To kick things off, can you help to provide a framework for what's happening and where we might be in this massive disruption cycle to our usual days of life?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all to the team for inviting me to join in today. It's been a great journey that I've had with Amazon over the last few weeks, getting to know the team and also now the opportunity to come outside. Just as a way of jagging you all as entrepreneurs that I like to think myself of, I want to show you something. See on my shirt here, if you have a close look, you'll all see that I'm wearing my favorite entrepreneur shirt today. That's little scooters. And little scooters are really something that you and I do in entrepreneur world, is when we go out on our own and go hard with what we believe and what we want to do. We'll talk about mental health a little bit later, but I just want to give the first heads up on how I think things are going with COVID. I like drawing, so if you can follow me, and I like also giving you little notes that you might like to take down and come back later and digest. So here's an idea. From the 1st of the 3rd of March to the 1st of the 4th, we have what we would call at the present moment, in hindsight, the shock response period of business and the world. So for those of us in Australia, the shock response period, I would just loosely say, was a little bit like grab your wallet, grab your keys, grab anyone you love and head for the hills. Now, for some of us who were office bound, this was quite a substantial shift. But for those of us in entrepreneur world, you might have just changed rooms at your house, or you may have actually stopped going to the library, or you may have stopped using the internet cafe as your landing place for addressing your business. So this shock period caught us all unawares. And I think that first response there was that some of you and I, as entrepreneurs, would say, oh gosh, you know, what the hell's happening here? I'm already in a state of high demand and high octane performance. What is this doing to me? What we're seeing now is as we enter into the next phase, which is the phase of the 1st of the 4th through to the 1st of the 6th, which is the 1st of June, is what I'm calling the reality phase. And the reality phase, in my mind, is coming to grips with, could yours and my business in entrepreneur land have some realities that it's now confronting? Things like, where's my money going to come from? Things like, where's my technology going to kind of enable me? Things like, can I be at all more responsive, more flexible, more nimble? Can I see my dream disappearing and feel that I'm helpless? There's a whole range of things in the reality period that we'll talk about over this next session that are skills that you and I can adopt to improve our performance. And I'll come to that in a second. Then the next one is we're going to see what we think is the 1st of the 6th through to the 1st of the 8th, which is going to be what I would call the adjustment. So we know in psychological ways and in mental and well-being ways that there are these phases. So my first drop to you is those phases. The second drop, I think, that is for you to have a bit of a think through, and I've thought about this a lot, is this one. Just imagine for a moment that you as an entrepreneur have a thermostat setting over here, which is your sense of being happy. So down the bottom here is unhappy. Sometimes unhappy has driven entrepreneurs to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and to make sure they willfully do what has to be done when other people would have given up. Sometimes the positive ebullience that you have as an entrepreneur, when you can't just wait to tell people how it's going, can be up here. It can drive you and I to stay up longer, go harder, go faster. So this thermostat is pretty important to you and I as individuals and in small business. What we've got to look at is, here's COVID, which turned up on your thermostat, and it can influence you like this. You can get down here, usually negatively affected. Now, I know that entrepreneurs are sometimes like, we'll come back to later, pirates. We sail the high sea, going about our business, hoping to be successful and effective one day or right now. And that's a bit different to all the other people who sort of hang around in Royal Navies like big businesses. You know, so we're out in the high sea. So some of us are very adept at quickly coming back and responding to the environment. And we call that lot the early adapter. Now, if you fancy yourself as an early adapter, as an entrepreneur, that's pretty good, because that gives you the jump and the bounce on all the other slow coaches. But some of us might be feeling a little bit less inclined that COVID, we've never seen this before. We've never heard of COVID until it turned up. And it's really been a bit of a shock to the system. So we could be feeling that we are late in the adaptation. And then you might feel that your business has not really fired, and you could be in a really difficult place. So these are the areas that, Rachel, I would introduce to the listeners. These two key areas.
Now, Toby, startup founders and operators in many ways know how to manage uncertainty. You know, it's inherent in so much of the nature of startup life, but this feels a bit different, right? So we have new information that's coming at us every day. The news cycle is faster and faster. Many of us who rely on funding from angels and VCs are fearful that might dry up. We don't know what life is going to look like on the other side. So how should startup operators and founders be navigating this? Are there structures that we can put in place to help make sense of uncertainty in this mass scale?
I think it's an interesting question, because one of the things about being an entrepreneur, and this might sound a bit rude, but is sometimes we feel at times that our nose is on the bitumen, going as fast as we can, and our backside's on the bitumen, trying to make sure that we can kind of survive. So we are very viscerally orientated people, and for that feeling and of emotion of feeling at all times like there's not much between us and the crash and burn, or between us and the joy and excitement of setting up Adelassane or setting up Canova or something in a dream that we all have in the bathroom some nights when we're thinking about how well it's going or not. One of the things that's unique for us is that we have a happy knack of being mentally a bit deranged. So it's okay in this current period to think about yours and my mental derangement. What I mean by that is I'm not being cruel to you, but you will know that it takes a lot of nuclear power and horsepower to wrangle your concentration into a position that you can use it to do what you need to do. So this is part of yours and my willfulness. Others would choke and burn at this point, but we are willful characters. And so willfulness is a whole new trait that's got to be dealt with in the current climate. You see, willfulness is pretty good. It's a bit like what you need to be on a high wire. Most of us like the nets being pulled out. Most of us like that. We don't like to tell people that, but we kind of get a bit of a fascination about it. It's why we actually went to this place called Entrepreneur World, because you could go in ho-hum land and get a job, a 9 to 5, and put money in your bank account. So we like it. So I think you need to celebrate your willfulness at the moment and respect yourself that, if anybody's going to have a crack at this mess, we're going to have a crack at it, because in Darwin's theory of selection, we've been out the front selecting ourselves for the opportunity to try something new and to sometimes be organized risk takers. So in this current period, what we've got to look at, I think, is making sure that you have two things in place. The first one at 25 to 35, if you're in that space, the first one is having a sense of your workspace. How many hours are you actually putting into your work? It could be 60, it could be 80. And what might be happening to you, and I've talked to a lot of people at the moment, even the non-entrepreneurs, and that is you might be making another box out here, which is called your expansion box. And this is your willfulness that in crisis, you will even expand your contribution effort to the cause. And this is a bit of a danger, because sometimes boundary setting and barrier creation are two skills that I'd like you to talk to you about, so that you can meter, moderate, and manage your capacity, so that you actually, in COVID world, you flatten your curve at the moment. You don't want to spike out, because spiking is dangerous. So it's about learning new skills, seeing familiar things in new ways. Embracing discomfort, making small changes. So back to this box. This is an expansion box, but this is the other box that we entrepreneurs have a bit of a problem with. And we'll talk about it later with Rachael. And this is the envelope of loyalty to my work. Because you see, most of us as entrepreneurs, my work is me and I am my work. And in this crisis period, that can either do your head in, or it can be, under pressure and duress, a golden opportunity to think about how you can change your strategy. So my first thought to a willful person is, look at your strategy and look at your boxes and have a think about this. Do I need to create at the moment a way of metering my energy to my business? And what alternatives or what other things could I become an investor in? So, and we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, so let's go into that, Toby. You mentioned identity and this this commitment that we have to the cause. So for founders, so many of their personal identities are inextricably linked with their startup. So often years of blood, sweat, tears, personal finances have been poured into them. So how can founders manage their own personal relationship with their companies or their founder identity? One, when time kind of is like Boyle's law, the gas is expanding to fill the vessel. And I mean, if we are going to get real, startups always have a failure rate, and there's reason to believe that right now they may fail at a greater rate. So can we talk about about that identity piece and what we can do, one, to contain the size of this vessel, and we can talk about some strategies there, and then we can shift gears and just talk about how we cope with some failures.
I'll tell you a story for the listeners. My first entrepreneurial foray was an interesting one, and I, like everybody else, believed that the business was me and I was the business. Now, one of the ironies was that at some point I felt that my financiers and others were, not necessarily on the same wavelength as me. So I said to them, either you buy me out or I'll buy you out, but this ain't going to work anymore. And so on the day of the call, they called me out and they said, we're going to buy you out. And I said, but hang on a sec, this is my baby. I invented it. I created it. And, what do you mean you're going to take me off the game? If you want a good book to read, read the Netflix book. It's a really good story about the guy who invented Netflix, and it's worth a read because I learned a lot over the Christmas holidays reading it. But anyway, so the one thing that I learned from the exercise was that they took my business away from me, and I was devastated and I was gutted. But I'll tell you what was really interesting. It was the greatest liberation of all time, because I had actually got my head in the wrong space in my 20s, as the business was me and I was the business. I was ignoring and neglecting the reality that I was a person who had other real ability, other real value, other real relationships that I had underestimated in my willfulness to be committed to my one thing, which was the startup. So my funny little piece of advice in the middle of this shitty period is, if you do burn your backside in this game, don't lose your bundle. Just actually remember that it's taught you a valid lesson, and that's for us entrepreneurs, is that you've got to be able to trade yourself out of that space. Otherwise, you could find it as being a choker on you through your life. So I would support anybody who's failed at business wholeheartedly, and I would say, watch out if you've never failed, because if you've never failed, you've never had to deal with the reality of success versus failure, or perfection versus imperfection. So my advice to you is, be brave, take the nets out, and just and be considerate of what you're doing. You're not only learning to build your business, but you're learning about yourself. And one of the good things to learn about yourself when you're a bit willful is to learn that you're made up of lots of good bits, shitty bits, bad bits, funny bits, wonderful bits, and creative bits, but you are all those bits. And until such time as you're up against the edge of nearly losing what you think you are and how you think you define yourself, until you're on the edge, you don't know how to value not the business, how to value yourself as a person. So take COVID, if it's putting you in crisis mode and making you feel like you're more vulnerable, look for the wonderful yin and yang of this setup. It's the terrifying failure, but it's also the creativity that you could be opportunistic in reinventing yourself. It's the Darwin period at its best. So I'm urging you as listeners, I'm happy to talk more about the subject, but have a think about it on this idea of what I've just tried to describe for you.
Now, Toby, let's talk about those bits. So you walked me through an exercise a few weeks ago around the personal audit, where I started to explore what are the different bits about me, and where am I allocating my time. And to be honest, the result was pretty confronting. And then, of course, I made my partner do it as well, so that we would both be equally confronted with these numbers. Can you share with us the concept of the personal audit, and how our founders should be thinking about that as they balance their bits during this time?
I'll do two things here. I'm going to put a caveat on one of these aspects, because some of you are young, 25 to 35-ish, and you feel that you have two big batteries, two big petrol tanks, a long way to go. You may be defining yourself as, if I am a success and hit my work goals. So you might be in this current phase. I was talking to my son about this. If you hit your work goals, you'll be a success. If you will be a success, you might say to yourself, I'll be a good provider for others in my process, a good protector of others, and a good producer of things. I will make and create stuff. So some of us have hot-wired up for hit my goals, be a success, therefore I will be happy. Now, if you're 25 to 35 and you've got 2 tanks of petrol, that little algorithm, if you dataize that and you say work goals, success, happiness, that little algorithm for you guys will be probably pretty easy. But what you won't realize is that you can sometimes be tearing yourself a different feature, which is you can also have a trajectory of success which is matched with a trajectory of self-destructiveness. And self-destructiveness is okay when you've got battery power, but it's non-sustainable. So that's the caveat for youngies at the moment. When I was a young entrepreneur, I just kind of thought I had 2 big petrol tanks and 2 big batteries, long way to go. And I didn't listen to anybody. And what I'd like to give you is some little bit of sage advice about this. Right. The next thing to think about is think of yourself as an investor in life. Your investment strategy for life is that you have, as an investor, at the present moment, you have some inputs. You have your time, you have your energy, and you have your effort. As entrepreneurs, we have insatiable thirsts for these inputs. We think we do. So as an investor, many of us will look at work and we'll say, I'm going to invest all my input into my work. So as a business strategy, makes sense. But the difficulty with entrepreneurship is the relevant and relative close proximity of when my work's going up and it's mine, it's my baby, I made it, I feel good. But when my work's going down, we're so proximally aligned, there's no gap in between. It's what I said before about nose and bum on the bitumen, that when it's going down, we start tearing the house down. We start saying, well, my investment is giving me no dividends. My psychological dividends from my business, if you write these down and you can write them down, are globally my confidence, my competency, my joy, my pleasure, because pleasure, these 2 are about passion and purpose, and my reward, what my angels will give me, or what my family will say when they say, well done, Sonny Jim, you did kicked a good goal there. So in the investment model that I'm trying to give you here as a strategic framework, think of your inputs, think of your work, think of the proximity of success and failure, think of what you get as a dividend psychologically. So when it's going up, I feel confident, I feel competent, I feel joyous, I feel pleasure, I feel reward, I feel recognition. But when it's going down, and COVID's the kicker in the game here, when it's going down, I start looking at my so-called dividends and my metrics being how do I feel about these things, my metrics start corroding. So where I went with Rachael and her group and we talked about it is that the person as the entrepreneur, this is a goal for life as entrepreneurs. I wish someone had told me this when I was 25. If you're going to become an investor and get all your money stuck and all your hope and all your wonders in the one thing called your work, you're in trouble, okay? Big trouble, Gunga Din. So the idea is to get yourself into diversified portfolio, to think outside the box. The best entrepreneurs right now are going to kick the goals if they've got diversified portfolios. And here's what I'd like you to write down. They're funny little things, but see if you can write them down. And we might ask Rohit to see if there's a bit of a backfeed on the number. I'd like you as a listener, if you can, give us your number. So what the trick is, I'll give you a box. I want you to rate yourself as how well you're investing in that box right now, okay? So hope you can see this corner of the screen. So the first box is your work. It's simple. Give yourself a rating out of 10. Am I a good investor in my work? Am I getting my return on investment from my work? Be aware, I talked about before, the envelope of loyalty. Be cognizant of putting too much energy into your work without realizing you're giving too much without getting much back. So work. How about we try, some of you as youngies, family, It might be your father, mother, brother, sister, it might be your grandparents. What's your investment strategy? Are you investing well? How about your relationships with people that you actually have in your world? Some of us have discovered with technology at the moment that we can really go hard on staying in touch, you know, house parties and things like that, and having catch-ups with people. As youngies, you'll probably be very much more apt and able at that, nimble and old farts like me, but relationships. Another one is exercise. Another one is your hobbies. Another one is philanthropy. Another one is volunteering. Another one is personal development. Now, personal development for me at the moment, I couldn't go on my long service leave to Italy with my wife for 2 months. I was pretty crestfallen because we should be on the plane right now. So I tried to learn Italian. I know one word in Italian, I think, which is, you know, speed up or something. But anyway, my personal development I should have been an investor in that, but I was investing in other areas and getting a balance. And then the next one is legacy. Now, legacy is a biggie for us entrepreneurs, because, you know, somewhere in the filming of the movie, you're thinking that you're going to leave a legacy for yourself or your family or someone you love or something that you'll get respect from it, etc. So on your scorecard, rate yourself right now. We'll stop the clock for 30 seconds. I'll stop talking and I'll get you to give me an audit score out of 10. What's your investment of time, energy, and effort to create these dividends in these areas? Now, there's no answer which is right. This is a personalized indexing of your data, as you would do as an entrepreneur, of your data. This is an indexing of what's my current position statement and where am I? So if you can rate yourself, can you then start feeding that into Rohit, please, to let him give us a little bit of feedback to Rachael and I, and we might have to start, we might do that. We might see how can we handle that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, we'll see if we can handle that. And we'll just roll on other things, but I'm going to stop for 30 seconds so you score, because this is very, very important to us entrepreneurs. Stop the clock and do your audit.
Toby, let's just go over those boxes again. So we have work, family, relationships, exercise,
hobbies, things that I like doing. My hobbies, philanthropy. Interesting as we're all recipients as entrepreneurs sometimes of other people's philanthropy. Your philanthropy might be, you know, giving $5 to something in a war-torn country. It might be donating anything that you can think of. You
community
belong to a group of people.
You know.
Yeah. Community, volunteering, big one at the moment. You know, working out that you might be doing it tough on your audit with your work, but there could be people less fortunate than yourself. Anzac Day is going to come around the corner shortly, and Anzac Day is going to remind you and I, as hardworking sort of COVID-driven cats, it's going to remind us that a lot of people did a lot to make sure you and I are safe in our island state here, you know, sparsely populated with a good health system. There's a lot of people who paid hard for that, and that's a bigger game than yours and my worry at the moment. So that's why that one's in there, volunteerism, and thinking about who volunteered and if you can volunteer. Personal development, Rachael. Professional development might be an idea for some of you. Get your skills up in a professional PD area. And legacy. Are they okay?
Yep, sounds right. Okay.
I hope you get a rating. I hope you try it out. I hope you get something back rather than sitting quietly going yada yada yada. This is a fun day out. But I hope you get right amongst it, because as entrepreneurs, we sometimes aren't good listeners. Sometimes we're good doers. But so I'm going to tell you that I know what it feels like when someone tells me to shut up and do an audit. So I'm telling you to do an audit. Okay. So old doctor thing, right? Okay. We happy with that?
Yep. We'll give folks a few minutes. So far, to be transparent, I came in with a 42. We had Rohit come in with a 46, and Sean has come in with a 51. So some real middle of the road bars there. So, you know, no one should be embarrassed with what their number comes in at. We have a 43 that's come in. Thank you for your sharing.
Harleen.
A 55. Well done, Dex.
I can see these guys. Hey, this is pretty groovy for an old dog. I can see this stuff popping up. So well done. Thank you for putting in your effort.
So Toby, while these numbers are coming in, why don't we talk about what we can do to improve some of these boxes? So I know you've talked to me about systems of good behavior, and again, putting in some frameworks and structure for those of us. And I'm kind of a structureless type of person. I like to kind of go with the flow. But right now in this world, like so many of us feel like we're floating. So we kind of need some things to anchor us down. So talk to us about these systems of good behavior and how you've seen them play out positively to help people like me right now.
Yeah, I'll tell you two little short stories. Many years ago, Obama, great leader that he was, Obama once said, I wear a black suit, a white shirt and a red tie every day. And somebody said, you're pretty boring, mate. And he said, no, I'm not boring. He said, I've got a system. And the system is I don't have to sweat the little things. I can talk and focus on the big things. So I learned something from listening to that dialogue. I think the other thing about the idea of systems of good behavior, I think that systems in yours and my life at the moment, when we're entrepreneurially kind of focused on the big W, is being able to cognitively reframe what's right in my life versus what's wrong in my life. And so as a cognitive reframing effort, I think that the systems of good behavior, to me, give you and I the freedom to be responsible, to do the right thing in the moment. Now, if you haven't got your systems in place, then sometimes those disciplines mean that you become distracted like Obama might be, and he's deciding for half an hour whether he'll wear a pink suit to work or not. Interestingly, his characteristics are probably different to Donald Trump's. Donald Trump told everybody in an interesting twist of behavior, he said, you can all wear masks, I won't. So I think Donald has got it a bit wrong, but I think Obama is like some of us and thinks the right way. I think the Queen of England is also an interesting character. If you get a chance to dig up her talk that she gave the other morning, you will see something in her fibre, which is you can trust that lady. She is a trustworthy person. She displays trusting behaviour. You cannot be a monarch for 68 years and not be able to be true to yourself. So I think her systems around her disciplines have probably helped her in crisis times before. And you will get this idea of your systems of good behaviour to help you through COVID, but they will help you undoubtedly in your next foray into the danger zone of feeling like you might be on the tightrope at some point in the future, with all the nets out, enjoying the fact that you can walk freely, but that you now have a recognition that you must always hold the bar properly when you're tightroping. You must always walk with one foot in front of the other. So these are the systems that allow tightropers to get it together. They don't just frig around and run up and down the rope because they die. So exercise, good idea. For some of you who have been exercising and they shut the gym, just because they shut the gym, some of you will obsess and say, oh, the gym shut, so therefore I can't be a gym merchant anymore. So invent an alternative, because it is very easy for you to sabotage your exercise and say it doesn't matter, but it is an essential ingredient. So too is your sleep. I can't emphasize the opportunity that you might have to try and construct good sleep patterns in this COVID space, because normally us wonks that like to build things sometimes are so chilled up, so zipped up that we can't shut down. So with sleep, I'd like you to think about becoming an early adapter and create your meditation. Meditation is really good. He or she who can empty their brain has a wonderful servant. He or she who can't empty their brain has an awful master. Entrepreneurship will give you a masterful brain sometimes, but to survive, to flatten your curve, and to create opportunities for a long game, not a short game, it's about that ability to quieten down that brain. So it's meditation. Eating well is important. One of our companies we look after is a fast food business. In the month of March, they went belly up. They went down the gurgler because people didn't want that because they were too busy stealing toilet rolls at the Woolworths. But now, in the middle of April, post-Easter, fast food is sneaking back. So you might need to be very careful about this. Take time out from your job to create good food to feed this little supercar that you're driving with some good petrol. Don't be a moron and eat shit. Okay, it's just stupid. Another thing that's really important in systems of good behaviour, like I've said in the audit, is now's the time to look up friends, relatives and acquaintances. There are people around you that might give you perspective, that you can empathise with them rather than sympathise with them. And that's going to come up a little bit later, I think, Rachel, is just a reflection around that. So these are a couple of systems of behaviour which I've mentioned to you. And I'd like you to start small, work hard and create big, which is to get those systems of good behaviour so that you can have the freedom to be responsible to do the right thing. And that is to asset manage you in this current state as an entrepreneur.
Toby, do you have any advice on how we kind of build some accountability factors in? You know, in pre-COVID life, we had accountability. Well, first of all, many of us were in an office. We didn't have access to our pantry 24/7. Maybe we had a friend that we popped out to the gym with. How do we hold ourselves accountable when no one's watching?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, accountability. I think to all intensive purposes, it's an opportunity to take a crossroads look at this. Some of us as entrepreneurs can intellectualize the need for us to actually be asset managers of our health. Some of us can be intellectualizing that. It's good for the other people, but it's not good for me. I'm a fast and furious. So one of the interesting things about this time period is to think of the Queen about trying to be true to yourself rather than Donald Trump playing with your head, and try and do that. Now, accountabilities can sometimes be saying to yourself, okay, I was okay pre-COVID to do certain things, but now I've failed at delivering on those things, so now I'm going to stop. So we have a happy knack of being 100 to 0 believers. Either what we're doing is 100% right and what we're not doing is 0 wrong. So I do think that what we've got to do is unbundle some of our drivenness and recreate or redirect it towards generosity and kindness to self. Generosity and kindness to self at the moment is possibly, take time out, go do some other things. Nobody else can do that for you. See, the thing that you and I use every day is we are harnessed up and trussed up with our smarts going fast and furious. We don't need anybody else to make us go fast. But what we do need to think about is the sustainability of that. And we need to unpack the worthiness of us doing this little next algorithm. So this next little algorithm, I'd like you to think about this. I kind of wish somebody had given me a kick up the backside when I was your age, but if I feel intact, physically, medically, mentally, and spiritually. Spirit doesn't mean going to church on Sunday. Spirit means hope. Hope means values and actions aligned. That's what spirit's about. If I feel intact, then I will feel less vulnerable. Therefore, I will cope better. Therefore, I will be more resilient and adaptable. So remember, I've got to join some threads for you because threads are really important in gigs like this. I talked earlier at the start of the show about that thermostat, that plus and minus, that bar, that, take a hit from COVID. That hit was about going down and coming back up again. And when you get above the line, you become an adapter. So adaptive people are going to survive. Some people are going to kill themselves in the filming of the movie because they're not going to try and be adaptive. They're just going to be self-destructive. So take a deep breath and have a think about your desire to be self-destructive or your requirement to be adaptive, to be preserving of yourself as an entrepreneur. You've got a long way to go, I can tell you. So, intactness. At the moment, I think it's important in COVID. It's a disruptive environment. Okay, we love disruption because that's when we nimble fellas and girls, we all run around like headless chooks and we work out what's good and what's bad. Now, if you're up against the wall at the moment, it's okay. Up against the wall is all right as far as I'm concerned as an entrepreneur, because that's when I am probably most dangerous to myself, but I'm probably most effective in what I need to do. It's fight and flight and fright and stuff. It's a good time. But if you can actually intrinsically in this moment build this platform, am I physically at the moment as good as I can be? Am I medically at the moment as good as I can be? Most of you are too young to be worried about coughs, colds and sore holes, so you'll be okay, but worry about COVID. But you can also be mentally, am I mentally okay? Am I spiritually okay? Are these things important to me? You mightn't have thought they were important until COVID turned up. It is now good to use the opportunity of COVID as an entrepreneur to start to get that intactness going, because we need to feel less vulnerable, and we can't do that unless we feel intact, and we can't do that unless we have systems of good behavior, and we can't do that unless we understand where our thermostat sits, and we can't do that unless we feel that we can actually gear change and try and be an early adapter, because that's what you're doing with your business. So it's about early adaptation to you, asset managing you. The next thing is you'll cope a lot better. This is a gig about keeping your head above water and coping a bit better than you thought you could. But more importantly, resilient people at the moment, folks, resilient people are people who find meaning in this adversity. They embrace discomfort. And this little show over here is about building islands of competency in a sea of self-doubt. You see, if you're a diversified investor right now and you're investing your time, energy and effort across a broader range of things and just being anal about your job and your work and your little business that you and I are trying to build, if you can diversify your portfolio, then you'll feel less vulnerable. You'll probably cope better because you can get some dividend returns on feeling confident as an athlete, competent as a hobbyist, maybe joy from philanthropy, maybe recognition from volunteerism, maybe that pleasure can come out of those relationships with your family. So do you see what I'm trying to get you to think about? I'm trying to get you to think that to be adaptable at the moment, you have to diversify. And that's hard for highly razor sharp entrepreneurial cats who just can think of nothing but the business. That's a danger signal. It's either you could make or break you on that. I hope I'm helping you to think about this important subject, which is you. You are, at the end of the day, you are the supreme asset of your entrepreneurial effort, not a funny little bit of software or a funny little bit of pie making machine or a funny little bit of agricultural equipment, whatever your entrepreneurship's in. You are the asset, and that needs to be restored by people like me. So Rachel, that might bring us on to an interesting area, which is about, could we encourage the listeners to think about the importance of getting higher support, which I call mentors, coaches and confidants. Is that worth a chat about now in terms of reality?
Yeah, I think that is always a discussion in our community, whether it's reaching out to people who have been there before, who have been through the journey, the ups and downs, the isolation, and encouraging folks to find and connect with those individuals. Maybe this would be a good time to shift gears and switch to some questions from the audience.
Yep. Okay.
Rohit, do you want to pop in and let us know if there have been any questions that either came in before the session or during the session?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that really insightful conversation, Rachel and Dr. Toby. I think those audits are obviously super important as well to highlight some areas where you're spiking in, as well as identifying some areas that you probably need to dedicate some more sort of time, energy, and as you said, investing in those particular areas as well. Just a reminder to all of the attendees that if you have any questions, please submit it through the Q&A tab, but I have picked out a couple from some of the questions that were submitted through the registration process. One is obviously there are stats that show that founders are almost twice as likely to suffer from mental health issues, or kind of the associated outcomes as a result of that. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, do you have any insight or strategies for how founders can handle emotional well-being? So in terms of ways of identifying if they have particular issues, or if they have identified it, what are some coping mechanisms that they can utilize?
Yeah, and Toby, we heard you say earlier, entrepreneurs in a way are deranged, and it's that derangement that makes entrepreneurs amazing and superheroes, and that's their superpower, but it also can be their undoing. So what are some of the strategies, that entrepreneurs who kind of rely on that, the same anxiety that drives them can also be their undoing? How do you balance those things without snuffing out the powerful elements of the traits?
I think this is a very sort of crystal and important part of entrepreneurship and how we do this. I sometimes say being, mental ill health or madness is alive and well, okay? It's all part of society. It's been around for a long time, okay? It's nothing new. I talk to people like, for example, one of my children is quite an anxious person, and I say to her that it is okay to celebrate your anxiety, and we need a lot of discussion around anxiety, and we need a discussion around depression. In interesting terms, anxiety, for example, is something that many of us as entrepreneurs have harnessed, but sometimes we're a little blind to what is going on when we're anxious, or what's going on when we're depressed. So what I'd invite you all to think about is that sometimes there's a little bit of us that's a bit introverted and doesn't like to tell people stuff. So I'll just do you a quick drawing about this. This is you and I and everybody else. We are building up rings that I would call onion rings. So onion rings in yours and my persona are the layers we add on each day and week to present to the world that we are effective, that we know our stuff, that we are going fast and furious. It is that externalized view that we want people to see. Now, some people as entrepreneurs have got what I would call a good dose of competitive isolation. So if you unpack the two words, competitive, you are some of the most competitive people on the planet, okay? You're up the front of the pointy end of the boat for competition. That's why you're there. That's okay. That's good. But one of the things that it can do to us if we're not very careful is it can cause us to make sure that this layer is as thick as it can be. Now, funny thing on the way to work, okay? Let's say you've got some weird mental health flaw, which is you might be anxious about your ability to add up or subtract, or you might be anxious about something that, is pretty screwy about yourself. So what entrepreneurs sometimes can do really well is we can mask. We're very good at putting coverage on these weird things. And so what we do is we've learned very clearly and effectively sometimes to harness that weirdness, to get the energy from that internal ruckus, that internal discomfort that we might have with ourselves, that internal friction, and we know how to focus it and funnel it out to go straight at something. So that's a quality, but it's also a problem because we put a very thick exterior on here, and we almost say to people, listen, Brutus, I'm not going to let you get inside the zoo, okay? Because I don't want you in there to find out that stuff's screwy. Because if you find out that's screwy, that's a weakness. If you find out it's a weakness, you might exploit me. You might use that against me. Therefore, I am not letting you in the show. So some of us have poorly developed trust skills. And trust is about trust, trustworthiness and trusting. It's about you developing in your entrepreneurial journey the ability to start to explore how to demonstrate that you are trustworthy to your investors, etc., that you do exceptionally well. But it's also about to develop a new code of practice, which is your trusting skills, to practice trusting what you see, not to assume, not to intellectualize, not to gravitate towards I know best, because those skills are what make you go fast, but those skills sometimes eliminate you from the ability to receive constructive feedback from those who care and love you. These are the inbound people who come in and want you to be able to know who you are. So competitiveness is a creator sometimes of isolation. So in managing your mental health, it is important to start to become cognizant of what is your mental health status. If you are a bit screwy, that's kind of okay. If you're on the spectrum, that's one of the reasons why you're a gun at doing what you're doing, because you're out on the spectrum. You are interested in the system of objects. Objects are things like rhythm, objects are things like numbers, objects are things like codes. You might be out on the spectrum with the ability to regulate and ordain the system of objects, but you might be a bit shortchanged on the ability to be into understanding emotions. Emotional capacity might be something. Therefore, you might struggle with this whole letting people in, letting people out, that kind of stuff. So my advice to all of us who may be in this competitively isolated state is, do not be 60 and turn up at my practice as a grey-haired old bugger like me and have no friends that you've developed relationships with. It's a bit late, the ship sailed. But be 25 and be brave and have a think about the possibility of creating trusting relationships with some people that matter, to be honest to them about what you're trying to do. Don't cover up. I say to people, it's a bit like going to a nightclub, okay? You go to a nightclub, you think you're going to pick up some really good-looking person at the nightclub, so you'll tell them all sorts of bullshit about who you are, okay? You won't tell them the truth. But if you really think about it, don't go to nightclubs to find people to help you with the current problem. What you've got to look for is people that you think you can trust. So get out your black Filodex or your black Apple phone and look down the list of people over the last 5 years that you think you had a trusting relationship with. I divide my higher authority people up into those who can help me with my business, those who can help me with my life, what I do in my life, and those that can help me with me. So at a juncture like this, getting your diversified portfolio of those you believe are helpers to your cause, and hone your trust skills. Now that might mean going to a coffee shop or going online and exploring with one of these people how you can tell them something and see what happens. If I tell Rachael that I have something I'd like to share with her and she goes weird and runs out of the room, it's highly likely she may not A, be interested in me, or B, she thinks I'm so mad that she's probably madder than me. So she says it's no hope. But if she sits like Rohit, who's smiling here in the other camera, and sort of smiles and says, yeah, Toby, tell me some more, then you might be picking up on the body language that you've been taught with as a human to start to explore those whom you can trust. So trusting is really important in that process. And the skill sets that we're looking for in our higher functioning people need to be explored. You won't get to Mecca in the first time. You might need 1, 2, 3, or 4 sets of trusted advisory people in this journey, people that are higher and can give higher advice. You can retire them and bring them on stream as you need them. And now, in times like this, not a bad time feeling vulnerable to reach out rather than feel vulnerable and say, I won't reach out. That's that thing there. I hope you get the drift.
And Toby, I think it's so important, especially right now when we are physically isolated. I mean, I've made a joke that I've been avoiding people before it was cool. Many of us who retreat inside ourselves now actually are able to retreat inside our homes, and ever more important to reach out. I think we have time for one more question, but I'm going to send it off. Sorry, Rohit. And that is, Toby, what is your hope for all of us on the other side of this? What would be the best possible outcome for startup leaders or society generally?
I think it's a really important question, because when I talk to the people in the population at the moment, I think there's about 65% of us are sort of doing really well to doing sort of okay. And I think 35% of us, when we do our surveys of our partners in our businesses, when we do that, we're discovering that there are probably 35% of people who are shaking and burning. So one of the things that might be my observation is that almost at this time, looking for people who seem to offer hope is an essential ingredient. Hang around with those people. You can't help but go with birds with a feather. So don't hang around people who are going to say to you, we're all going to die, okay? It's just therapeutically unadvisable. It's not a self-serving reality to do that. So go look for people. Today, I hope, has been looking for hope. But my thoughts about this are this. Many of us pre-COVID had routines, rituals, habits, opportunities, all sorts of things that we had going on. COVID came along as an unexpected event. COVID whacked us all for a 6 out of a park. Now, it'll either kill you or make you stronger. So my hope is that some of you, like you are as nimble people, will stop, stand back, find out where there's a little crack in a wall, find out where there's a little hole in the roof, find out where there's a little kind of broken board in the floor. Somehow you'll do it, and you're going to burrow out and you're going to reinvent yourself. So take this as a reinvention period, not to be overwhelmed by the negativity of it, but ask yourself, okay, I've got a problem. The problem is I want to have a bright future. And so I think that the bright future is going to be there. I know some people who are in their 40s with young kids. I know that COVID has caused working from home to remind them that flying and having a Qantas gold card, because you're some big gun in the big dog business, it was a status symbol. I know that those people now are saying, I don't want to fly. I want to have a business where I can have work-life balance. I want to have a business where I can have family connections and have reality checks with the people I love. So they're looking to the future to reprogram what was historically a destructive set of habits. So I think if you can take your own, kind of trip and walk around the park and say, okay, is the future got anything destructive in it for me? Or has the future got anything in it opportunistically, which is constructive for me? And what do I need for me? There's no magic formula, but there is an algorithm, not a statement of what you must do, but it's an algorithm. What's constructive for me? What's destructive for me? And what's the power of taking ownership of my destiny? What's the power of that? Entrepreneurs know that. The power of destiny is always been important. So don't stifle that at the moment by feeling shitty. I hope I'm making some sense there, Rachel, with the constructive versus destructive analysis for yourself.
Well, it's certainly hitting home, especially as you start to mention the travel and how much, I know personally how much I'm gaining from being home and present with my family more. Toby, we are at time. So first of all, I just want to thank everyone who tuned in. But Dr. Toby, thank you. Insightful as always, some incredibly powerful messages for entrepreneurs and startup leaders who joined us. So thank you so much. And Rohit, why don't you close us out by introducing our next guest for next week? And hopefully everyone who's on the call will tune in next time, Thursday, same day, same time. Rohit?
Rachel, thank you.
Once again, thank you very much, Rachel and Dr. Toby, for running this very important session. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to the community this afternoon. I know there were a few other questions that came in terms of additional resources, so we'll look to put a few things together as a follow-up for everyone that attended. And
Most certainly.
As Rachel mentioned, we're running this as a weekly webinar series every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. And our next guest is Jody Oster, the Regional General Manager of Uber Eats for Asia. As you can imagine, with the current situation, the demand for delivery services has skyrocketed with the social distancing measures implemented around the world, with 10x the number of companies signing up to Uber. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. With 10x the number of companies signing up to Uber Eats, as consumers and businesses adapt, everyone is turning to services like Uber Eats. Jody and Rachel will be discussing how Uber Eats has responded to the COVID-19 crisis, how they're helping customers, and how Jody is leading her team through this moment. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and take care of yourselves, and we will see you at the same time next week.
Thank you, everyone.